Is this going to come out in the new year? Or are we going to be like, Happy New Year?
Welcome to episode 11. My name is Kenny.
My name is Will.
I'm Selena.
I'm Sherry.
And today we're going to do a year-end review of some topics that have come up or news stories that have come up in 2018.
2018's over. Yay!
What a nightmare. Only 2 more years of torture.
Yeah. And then we've got Doug Ford.
Doug, right?
Doug Ford.
I like how we all hesitated there. Nobody really knows one of the Fords who got into Ontario, and we have lots of years of him.
Yeah. So, well, maybe we could start with that. I mean, like Doug Ford. Obviously, his government, they're trying to scrap some sex education in schools. So maybe we want to start there.
Yeah, so that's my topic for this year in review, because as a teacher, I'm very passionate about this one. So when Doug Ford got into power, he decided one of the things he ran on was that he was going to completely scrap the old sex education. And a lot of the campaign against the sex education came from some religious zealots and some conservative groups. They were talking about how in kindergarten they were learning scientific names for body parts and teaching young children about topics like masturbation, oral sex, and vaginal lubrication. Anal intercourse was presented in a way that students would interpret as carrying no higher risk for sexually transmitted infections, so says the religious group.
Oh, okay. So this is
Yeah.
what they're saying.
Yeah.
To clarify,
This is not
this is
the
not
truth.
the actual, reworked curriculum. This is what religious groups were saying and why
Yes.
so many people were, vehemently against it without actually knowing what was covered. Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
They also campaigned on the idea that being male or female is a quotation mark social construct. Quotation mark. I enjoyed that one on the website. I read all this so you don't have to. They were also upset that there was an undertone of sex as something done for pleasure, and in their words, recreational activity, not out of love or marriage. They also said it was age inappropriate. So they put out the whole spectrum of ideas that sex should not be talked about in the curriculum, essentially.
I think a big thing also made it seem like they were teaching sex to, kids in grade 1, which isn't the case.
It's definitely not true.
Wasn't the plan to start talking about consent early on,
Definitely.
when they were young, but it's not sex per se, but it's around consent.
Yeah, I thought it was consent, healthy relationships,
Yeah.
probably also body parts earlier on than what's actually done, I would think.
Yeah.
I have a full breakdown of what
I'd love to
these
hear it.
differences are.
Okay, hit us up.
Yeah, so this was a Globe and Mail article that we will link to in our details, and it summed up the changes in each category. So the first category that we'll go through is language. In the 2015 curriculum, students learn the names of different body parts, including genitalia, using scientific terminology like penis or vagina, as well as basic personal hygiene by the end of grade 1. Now that is the good curriculum that we like, that was changed by the Liberal government in 2015, and then the Conservative government went to the interim version, which is partly the 2014 version. So when the 2015 version was going to come out, they decided they were going to the Liberal government was going to put out a new version because we were going by the 1998 version for so many years. So we did a 2014 version that updated everything, and then we revised it into the 2015 version, which was the version that we kept until 2018. The sad year. So the interim version, the 2014 and now our version, by the end of grade 1, students learn the names of major body parts. So things like arms, legs, without using the names of any genitalia.
See, the issue with that, though, is that boys already know what their bits are called, whereas girls never have any idea what's going on down there.
Or they know weird words like pee-pee or vajayjay. Those are non-scientific terms, and I do not think we should teach those to children.
What?
Tamagotchi?
Yeah, we let my sister go along with that word, and like now looking back, like we should have just given her the real word, but for some reason she just calls it her
Isn't that
Tamagotchi.
Oh, no.
toy?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't know
What
how
if-
that happened.
You gotta take care of it or
But like,
something.
I thought it was funny, so I went with it. But like, I do think there's real value in actually just teaching kids all the names.
She turned out okay.
She did.
But
But still,
what
I
are-
feel like that's a
what were
common
the
thing,
risks? I
though.
mean, someone could have like got her a Tamagotchi.
Or she could have told the teacher, like, someone touched her Tamagotchi.
And
Yeah.
wouldn't think anything of it.
True.
Yeah.
So there are
Totally.
risks when kids can't actually identify, or it's like a really big issue for people who are nonverbal, for children who are nonverbal, and they have to be able to explain, what happened to them. Sometimes there's been cases where they say that my tummy hurts because that's the closest body part that they know or have access to when they're using communication systems. Sorry, side note.
No, totally.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
language is so key for children to understand concepts and be able to like say, hey, this kind of hurts, or like this happened. Because without that language, children can't report or understand those concepts.
Yeah, and I mean, kids are smart. I mean, you can teach them words, and they may use it inappropriately, but it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as they know.
Our culture just fears words.
I know, like,
Yeah.
they just fear the icky. I'm putting quotations. The
Yeah.
icky words.
All right, so that was language. We also have LGBT, gender identity, and expression. So the introduction of 2015 curriculum says teachers should always consider the needs of transgender and gender non-conforming students. In grade 3, it teaches children that differences make people unique and to respect people with different skin colors, physical abilities, cultural values, gender identities, sexual orientations, and so on. In grade 6, students learn to challenge stereotypes about gender roles, sexual orientation, and gender expression, and how factors like gender identity, body image, mental health, and so on can affect someone's self-concept. In grade 7, students learn about physical and psychological factors related to decisions about sexual health, such as gender identity and sexual orientation. In grade 8, students learn about different gender identities, such as two-spirit, transgender, intersex, and how factors such as sexual orientation and gender identity can influence people's decisions about sex, and that gay straight student alliances can be sought out as supportive services. Get ready.
What is two-spirit?
So it is the First Nations version of LGBT. So it's
Okay.
what they have had in their culture for, longer than all our culture existed.
Because I don't even know most of that stuff.
And the two-spirit was always like a very respected role.
Interesting.
So like a lot of, I can't say it was for all First Nations, but for at least some of the First Nations, they had these two-spirit roles, and that was seen as like a positive thing. Whereas I feel like in our culture, it's like, oh, you're like not, binary, heterosexual, like, ooh, what's going on there? So
I
it's
feel like
just-
even in over evolutionary time, there was an actual really important role, for two-spirited individuals, right? Because there's a whole argument of, how did homosexuality survive evolutionary kind of processes? Well,
There's a TED Talk on that. Did you
Right.
see it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's that particular talk, but I definitely have heard talks on.
Yeah.
On
We
that
should
topic.
link to that
I'll-
as well.
I will link it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so get ready. The interim version, the version we are at now. Students learn about similarities and differences between themselves and others, such as body size and gender in grade 2. This version does mention gender identity in its introduction, but only to flag it as a potentially challenging topic to teach. The introduction also states that students of all gender identities should feel comfortable and free from harassment. This version does not specifically mention that the topic of gender identity be taught in any grades. The word transgender is mentioned once in the glossary using the non-preferred term transgendered. So transgendered would be the psychological disorder word that we have taken out of the
DSM.
Yes.
the DSM, that we've taken it out of the DSM. Yeah, so they don't learn about different gender identities or sexual orientations. They don't have to learn about transgender, anything like that. I think it's wrong. I think these kids are exposed to it, and because LGBT people have such a higher rate of suicide, that these things need to be talked about and not seen as shameful.
Definitely.
Are there any like kids shows where that's like more of a character role now? Like I feel like there are in media now, at least like there are more shows that show that, but I just wonder if it's at the right age level. Like would any grades are there any like gay characters that grade 6 students would be watching on TV?
I mean, grade 6 students, I've heard, watch Game of Thrones and stuff like
See,
that. So like,
that's not really a great role model for sexual education. So,
but they're exposed to a lot of different things. Is what
Yeah.
I'm
I
meaning,
mean,
and
there's a lot of stuff in the media now, and
it's not
there's-
enough though. We
it's-
can't just be like,
I
oh,
know.
the media shows it. We don't have to.
I don't know. But in terms of it's exposing
Just think of
some
Ellen.
variety,
Dory.
but it still goes back to, it sounds like we're going backwards in Ontario. What's really the hesitation from parents to want this?
Misinformation. And also, like, not probably people being homophobic.
Yeah, the religious right does not believe in the LGBT community, really. They're highly against it. So for them, when I read their little article about what was wrong with the old curriculum, they, in quotations, put that gender is a social construct, and it's not a social construct. Well, like, it is, but sex is not a social construct. You're male or female, but some people are born male, and
There's intersex as well.
Well,
They're
it
not
still is
female
a social
or-
construct in the sense that we created a definition that divided, somewhat of a spectrum, even on sex, because there's varying chromosome pairs and whatnot, and it divides it into two seemingly arbitrary, well, not completely arbitrary, but arbitrary where we drew the line. Right, and of course, there's going to be situations where people don't fit perfectly into those two rigid categories. Like ultimately, we're all just people of varying different orientations in various different ways, and the majority happen to fall into these two categories. But I mean, they are ultimately human constructs.
And I do think there's like a little bit of that like social construct in terms of like gender roles, right? Like the fact that we don't really see it as like a spectrum. It's like, are you a girl or are you a boy, rather than being like, oh well, like biologically a girl, but like I like a lot of things that like are typically boy, and like just let me live, rather than having to like put a label on it. Like,
And there are a lot of religions that base their religions on the gender roles. So I knew a Jehovah's Witness, and she often talked about how men are the working ones, and in the household they are the last word and the final say, and then that women are kind of the followers. There was also changes that were made in the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit category. Just as a side note, the Ford government also scrapped the planning of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit curriculum that was going to go into schools. So teaching about First Nations and their history and that sort of thing, it was being updated.
what was the reason for scrapping that?
The Liberals had invested some money in it. The Ford government didn't want to keep investing money in it, so they pulled the funding and scrapped the initiative. So that's fun. So with the sex ed curriculum in the 2015, the good curriculum, students learn the basic stages of human development in grade 2, including a teacher prompt about teaching from different cultures, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit cultures, about the cycles of birth, life, and death. In grade 6, students learn how to build healthier relationships with others and themselves using skills based on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit cultural teachings. In grade 8, students learn about the two-spirit gender identity, which is used by First Nations people to refer to someone with both feminine and masculine spirits. And the interim curriculum, which we are in now, students in grade 4 learn about teachings of First Nations, Métis, or Inuit cultures to strengthen their relationships. And that is it.
What does that mean? That's so vague.
It is vague, and you know what? The curriculum doesn't really explain it that much. So a lot of this curriculum that they're going by, the teacher kind of makes some executive decisions on how they will teach it.
Yeah, but parents can report directly to the government to complain about what the teachers have decided to teach.
That is another aspect of it we can get into maybe after we go through the curriculum, because that definitely did happen. So for the abstinence category, the 2015 version, a teacher prompt urges grade 7 students to be clear in their own minds about what they are comfortable doing, including delaying sexual activity. A prompt in grade 8 notes that abstinence is the only way to be 100% certain about avoiding sexually transmitted infections or unwanted pregnancy. And in the curriculum we have now, students learn that in grade 7, they learn about abstinence as it relates to healthy sexuality, and in grade 8, about the importance of abstinence. The curriculum's introduction instructs teachers to portray abstinence as a positive choice.
So that's the old one,
That's
the new one?
that's what we're in
Jesus.
now. That it's a positive, abstinence is a positive choice, and the importance of abstinence.
So when teachers are given a curriculum, what does that look like? Like, what does a curriculum look like? Is it
So-
like give them this, give them that, or is it like generally talk about these topics and you're like, okay,
So you have different categories, and then in each category you have certain things that you have to teach, like certain mandatory things, and so it'll say teach about healthy sexuality and how that is related to abstinence. And then underneath that they'll have a prompt of something like the teacher could say. So it's a general, and then they have like a specific of something you could say or an example of it.
There's still a lot of like wiggle room in a lot of these things.
Yeah, sometimes. In the sex ed curriculum though, you get into such a gray territory because you've got parents. And parents are very concerned about what their students are learning. And so
You also just generally have like teachers' own biases, right? Or teachers' own comfort level. Like I remember I had a teacher who wasn't comfortable, so she brought some random nurse.
we had a
Like,
nurse as
funny
well.
looking toes. That's all I remember. But this nurse like wasn't engaging. She wasn't our regular teacher, so she came in and said some stuff, right? Where I feel like none of our other courses were taught by someone else. So like it just, I don't know. I feel like the teacher has like a big role in actually getting this message across and creating a normal and effective learning environment.
I agree with you. I think that's why it's important to have certain things in the curriculum. So having teachers understanding that students need to learn about what they're comfortable doing, and including delaying sexual activity, stuff like that, having that specifically in there so that teachers can say, okay, here's the checklist of what I need to teach. It's a hard topic to teach. It's very embarrassing for everyone, and teachers who are maybe more experienced are less embarrassed by it, but I can't imagine that it would be the most fun to teach a bunch of giggling grade 8 students about sex ed.
But I think when the teacher's embarrassed, it sends like such a strong message
That's
across
true.
that sex is embarrassing.
Yeah.
Like I feel like as a teacher, you need to get up there and own it. And like, sorry, instead of that Mean Girls coach who's just like, if you have sex, you're gonna die. Okay, now everyone take a condom. Everyone take a condom. Okay, good, Like then you almost have to just be a little bit like, okay, here's sex, guys. Because otherwise it's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna teach this thing and I'm kind of awkward about it. Because then it's like, well, if she's awkward about it, or
I think
my
there are a
teachers-
lot of teachers who do teach it that way, and then maybe some who feel less comfortable with the
Yeah.
subject, who bring in a nurse, like you said. So it's tough. I think that
I feel like then there just also needs to be a lot of education for teachers on how like to get them up to a point that they feel comfortable and like to be able to talk about it.
Well, probably some of these teachers also need an updated sex education as well.
Yeah, people who went through the 1998 curriculum. Yeah.
There's a lot of new terms that they have to remember.
Yeah.
Do you guys watch Big Mouth at all?
Yes.
I love
you
that
sounded
show.
like Coach Steve when you so I started laughing.
Because Coach Steve, where like the kids are educating him because he's like, wait, what? Great episode.
What
on that.
happens?
There's a really great episode where they just do this little montage thing of like teaching Coach Steve basically like about sex.
He's the gym teacher,
The gym
health
teacher.
teacher.
Yeah, he's their gym and health teacher, but like is still a virgin and doesn't know anything. So the kids put on these like little skit type things, and they teach the teacher about like different forms of protection and like ovarian cysts and like other different concepts. Side note.
Link
It
in
is
the
a good
description.
show.
No.
No, literally, please put Big Mouth out there. It's great.
There's also the category of consent. So in the 2015 version, students learn in grade 6 that consent is defined as a clear yes, and that anything else, including silence or uncertainty, is not consent. In grade 7, students learn the importance of clear communication with a romantic partner and all aspects of sex, including consent. Consent is taught again in grade 8. And get ready, The new curriculum does not mention the concept of consent.
At all.
Consent
I'm
at all.
surprised that the 2015 one only mentions in grade 6. You'd think that'd be something that would come up in like grade 1.
I think that they should in grade 1.
Because it's this idea that
teaching
you're not
people
supposed to touch people. Right?
Yeah.
I think they probably teach like sexual consent at that time. You know?
Okay.
I mean, they have a hands-off policy right from kindergarten. You know?
Yeah,
So they
but I
are
feel
kind
like
of teaching.
it's good if you just do that as early on, where you're like, well, I wouldn't just go hug someone without asking them, or like, you know, what happens when you hug your friend and you realize they react kind of weird. Like, I think you can teach these like indicators of consent.
Don't they? Just not in health class. I feel like teachers, like, just for playground etiquette, I feel like that's like, I know that was taught in my public
I know
school.
playground
really strongly.
etiquette though, they say no, like like no hands or
Oh,
feet,
you're
but
right.
it doesn't say
Okay.
like you could get in trouble for holding your friend's hand sometimes.
That's true.
Even though it was consensual. They just do a blanket
Well,
like don't touch each other.
Do you think kids at that age are like psychologically ready to start putting themselves like in the perspective in the shoes of another person, like just psychologically, like,
Yeah.
or isn't there like some age before which children aren't able to
No,
see
grade
other people
1.
as others, and that's why they like no?
That's really young.
Okay.
At a really young age, children start helping other people. They have these experiments where
Okay.
a researcher will like drop something, and the little kid will be like, "Oh, that's the piece that she needs," or like a puzzle piece, and the little kid will come and bring it to the person, understanding what their objective is and what they're trying to achieve.
Okay.
So they have like studies that. So when you're in grade 1, you can totally understand that,
Okay.
and you can understand like, I don't like it when Sally, holds my hand. Okay, well then let's tell Sally that you don't like that, or vice versa.
So there was some stuff also on online behavior, but it's fairly similar in both curriculums. And then the last one is masturbation. In the 2015 curriculum, teachers are prompted in grade 6 to explain wet dreams, vaginal lubrication, and masturbation as normal if asked. Exploring one's body
If
or
asked.
yeah. So if they are asked about those questions, which usually they are, then they are prompted to explain those things. And one of the things it also said was exploring one's body by touching or masturbating is something that many people do and find pleasurable. It is common and it is not harmful and is one way of learning about your body. So that's from the curriculum. The new curriculum does not mention masturbation at all. So it's teaching students that
The new one, as in like the revised one, the 2014.
the current one that we're in, yeah. So we're not teaching our students that sex is normal and that you can participate in it for pleasure.
I think it's weird that the children have to ask about masturbation.
No, it wasn't. They teach masturbation, didn't they? But they weren't teaching about
No, they only
vaginal
teach. They
lubrication.
said they teach if asked.
Yeah.
But I thought that was. So they only teach masturbation if asked.
Yeah, wet dreams, vaginal lubrication, and masturbation is normal if asked. So if a student asks you, then you say, "Oh yeah, it's normal," and you can explain it a little bit.
If they ask anyway.
Do that many students ask that?
Yes.
But if they do ask
Really?
anyway, you might as
Okay.
well just teach it. Like why make Timmy go
I'm
ask the
assuming
question?
that
You know.
I'm assuming that teachers do teach it anyway. But then after we got into this new curriculum, the government realized that there was so much pushback that they decided to set up a hotline for parents to call when their teacher teaches something that they are not comfortable with. So Big Brother is out there trying to watch all those teachers, make them not teach their
So is
kids
that
about
still
sex
a thing?
education.
That phone line still
It is
exists?
still a thing. It is still a thing.
Is there any stats on how many phone calls or if any teachers have been
There's been no stats.
penalized for that?
No, I know a whole bunch of us, including myself, trolled the hotline and sent in emails about how awful the new curriculum is. So I did that. They also asked for input from parents. That's continuing until December 15th, and that's the cutoff for input from parents. They said that the old curriculum that the Liberals put in didn't get consent from parents, but they did have a whole bunch of experts who weighed in, a bunch of parents who weighed in. With the consent thing, there was a young girl who really pushed for consent and got the government to change it. I read an article about it. It was great. So, there was public input into this. But I feel like it's all these religious groups and right-wing groups that are so loud about it that the majority of Ontarians want their children to be educated properly, but
then
it's
they
these
get-
groups.
And they're probably weaponizing social media to spread this across
Yes.
their own networks, right?
And they're spreading like misinformation.
Right.
Yes. And one of the website that I looked at that was spreading misinformation, I believe, is linked to the anti-abortion group Coalition for Life. Is that what it is?
I think that
Anyway.
sounds familiar.
Yeah. So I believe they're linked to that as well. That's great that they are forcing our curriculum to change.
It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah. So that was 2018.
I'm looking forward to next year. What's gonna happen?
Oh boy. It's not going to change for a while.
Yeah.
Really? It's like
Until we get a liberal government into Ontario, we can't change that curriculum because it's dictated by our government.
Maybe the Irish has figured it out.
Yeah, Ireland's been doing some great stuff. So in this past year, they've had two kind of referendums. So they've overturned their blasphemy law. I can't say that, blasphemy law. There we go. Which I think is really, I mean, it's kind of shocking that they still had that because they even kind of acknowledge it's like a very medieval type of law. And I think it just generally shows like trends that people are kind of becoming more atheist, although Ireland still in general is a very like Catholic nation. So they actually had 64.85% of the voters vote for yes to remove the prohibition on blasphemy. But there's still 35% who voted in favor of retaining it. So I think that's still really interesting that there's still people who are obviously against it. But I think it's great that they have these kind of like specific topic-based referendums. Like, do we even really do referendums in Canada?
No.
No.
And I feel like that's such an issue because that way then like stuff flip-flops back and forth. Like you're saying, like the Liberals do this and then this happens and then the Conservatives come in and they're like, no, we're going to do that. Whereas if you had a referendum where the whole nation is like, no, we want this, you know, the next party can't really come in and like reverse that.
I think it's a good system.
Yeah.
I wish we had referendums.
Don't we also run into risk though? There's maybe certain issues that
We should leave to the experts.
we should leave to experts, or maybe it's a little too taboo. Now I can't think of anything off the top.
Can you think of anything though where like
Climate change initiatives, perhaps, if you had like 70%
you think the majority though would like what issues in Canada do we think where the majority would vote like not approve?
What about
do you know what I'm afraid of? It would be like things around like transgender rights. I feel like
okay, that's a good one.
the larger population might be hesitant.
What about like the public school versus Catholic school system? I think that the majority of Ontarians are in favor of one public school system. A referendum on that would be nice.
I think the big thing is that when you do referendums, as seen by Brexit, you really need to educate because that is a perfect example
Of a referendum gone wrong.
because
You can't even force people to be educated though. Like I feel like even
That's
with
so
like
funny.
voting, you just can't force people to be educated.
But I think you can make sure, like I think apparently like a huge issue was that like the small group who was like pro-Brexit spread all this information so that people were like, oh, if this is the information, this is what's going on, yeah, of course I want Brexit. And then afterwards realizing, wait a minute.
I knew
we didn't
nothing
have-
about economics.
Yeah,
or
I don't know anything about economics, I don't know the
trade.
full picture of this. Or a lot of people were like, well, it's never going to go through. Like, are you kidding me? It's just a small group that's like arguing for it. So a lot of people didn't vote, you know? So I agree referendums need to be careful and that education is so key. So the Ireland one was actually really interesting. So they had the blasphemy referendum, but they also had for overturning their 8th amendment, which was actually against abortion. The only situation where a woman could previously get abortion were if it was harm to the mother and possibly also the child. But if it was like any kind of rape or any other kind of reasoning, you had to go elsewhere, like basically like leave the country to get an abortion. So it was interesting. So over my Facebook, I have a bunch of like Irish friends and I could see all the kind of like campaigns and like there's a lot of people, both sides, yes and no, like firmly trying to like fight that. And I thought that was kind of cool that they're trying to at least get involved and like trying to educate. But fortunately, at least from my viewpoint, they did vote to drop the 8th Amendment. So abortion is now legal in Ireland. And
Yay, Ireland!
yeah, so overturning blasphemy, overturning abortion laws.
You mean
is
anti-abortion laws?
Anti-abortion, so restrictions on abortions or the prohibition of blasphemy. So now blasphemy is allowed and abortions are also allowed. And then kind of like one last cool thing about Ireland is also, this was actually a story that took place in 2017, where an Irish footballer and his fiance were trying to have a humanist wedding, but they were told that they would have to have the humanist wedding and then additionally get kind of like a civil registration for their marriage because the humanist ceremony wouldn't be recognized. But since then, they kind of pushed the government, and now there's humanist weddings. So this article is from August 2018, and they're talking about all these other humanist weddings that are now taking place, and just being able to see that ceremony as just as, I don't know, respected,
Legally
legitimate.
legally legitimate as like the traditionally religious ones. So I don't know, it's really cool seeing Ireland make these great strides, and I think referendums can be positive.
I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about
Yeah.
it, I don't know if we want that.
I guess like Canada's already progressive enough, but I think in certain situations it is really important to just ask the people.
I don't know. We can't trust these people. We
I'm
can't trust the
with Kenny.
people.
I'm with Kenny on this one.
Look at what happened when we trust the people to vote.
The people don't know what's going on. It's gonna be a mixed bag. You know, half the time the public will agree with what we agree with. Half the time they won't. So it'll be catastrophic. You know, like I don't know if it's worth rolling those dice.
I mean, yay for Ireland, though, because they're such a religious, conservative country that it's nice to see them making such good strides.
Really great strides, especially in this kind of time, and just to kind of seeing, because I think they're doing it in a referendum style, it shows that it's actually what like the people as a whole want, rather than like a political party who's like trying to make these changes.
So going back to the education piece, what was different in Ireland compared to Brexit in the UK?
I think a concept like, do you want abortion, yay or nay, is a little bit more straightforward than like, do you know anything about economics and what's going to happen to England if we leave the European Union?
Well,
So-
the question was really just like, do you want to leave the European Union? Right? People didn't understand the implications of
Yeah,
that.
whereas
but-
I feel like
One's like
people-
a moral subjective thing, so there really is no wrong answer. I mean, like, so maybe you could just ask for like moral preference, subjective things, but anything to do with the economy or whatever,
Yeah.
or like even climate change. But then trans rights, I see your problem there too, right? Just because the majority of people might not see that as important doesn't mean that it's not.
I think it probably really depends on the type of issue and what are the circumstances or like consequences of it going either direction, right?
But you couldn't just say certain issues get a referendum and some don't.
I don't
Or
see
can
why
you?
you can't do that. I mean,
I think it
Don't
makes
you
sense.
think? I mean, I feel like the supporters of, let's say, a certain cause will definitely try to make it like turn it into a referendum issue. So
Yeah,
you
but I
would have
think
to set a lot of guidelines and boundaries.
I'm now changing my mind. I'm on your side now. I don't want the
Yeah.
referendums.
like I think we need that. Like some referendums could be useful,
yeah,
right? But I think we just need to acknowledge that some topics a referendum makes sense, other topics it doesn't. And I mean,
I just can't think of like strict like guide like
Yeah, how do we decide
How do you
what-
decide this? Like how would you form it?
But like the referendums that they mentioned, this was like legalizing gay marriage, overturning the blasphemy law, and overturning the Eighth Amendment, which was against abortion. And I feel like a lot of those things, they do have a huge impact on like a population of people, but they don't have as great of an impact on like a systematic, like it doesn't have as many things to work out. It's kind of like a yes no versus like, how do you change the education system, like, or even voting for one education system, what's the process of doing that? And saying yes no isn't really enough. It's the same thing with like legalizing marijuana. Sure, you could vote yes, I want to legalize marijuana.
no, I think that's fine. I mean, if you don't, if the population doesn't think something should be illegal,
Yeah,
why is it illegal?
I guess it just comes down to then it needs to be clear of how it is going to be legalized, right?
Sure.
And it's like those specifics of like the process, how you're going to do it. Same with like probably the abortion of like, okay, but how will abortion centers work? You know, who will have access to it? You know, where
And
the
I don't know that the
protocols-
people should have say on stuff like that. 'Cause that's where you should go back to the experts to work out the
Mhm.
nitty gritty details.
But I think the experts need to have both of the situations in mind, where I feel like with the Brexit, they were just like, yay or nay, without actually considering, like, okay, if they choose this, this will be the plan, and if this is voted, this will be the plan.
Yeah.
Versus we're gonna vote, and all the pro-Brexit people said, "Oh, we're out of here."
Oh my god.
So maybe you're right. Maybe you're right for. I think there's maybe a time and a place.
Yeah, I think this is like another podcast episode debating
Yeah.
how to figure
Democracy
this
is hard.
out. It is. I don't think it works. No,
Right.
just kidding.
I mean, I agree, but I don't know what's better.
I know.
So
I'm
it's
kind
that
of in the same
classic,
camp. I'm just like, I can't think of anything better, but
I can think of a number of
Democracy's
things better, but
just-
like the risks and like, will they last long term? You know, too much power and then you get corruption and
Yeah.
all yada yada.
I just can't trust people.
Me neither. The average person. I just think we should exclude some people from having a vote on a certain issue based on a test you have to write before to get a ballot. You know, it's like,
Didn't they try this in the U.S.?
Did they?
Yes, that's
Really?
how they
Oh.
excluded black people. Remember?
No, I don't remember
No?
this.
Oh, so in I
Uh,
forgot what a decade, but basically, black people had to do like a mathematics test.
right. That's dumb, but they haven't
But-
received the training.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I think it should be issue specific. So, for example, it's like I don't think you should exclude them from having a vote on all things. It's more like you shouldn't get a vote on climate change if you don't know
The
that CO2 in the atmosphere, if more of it is going to increase the temperature. You know, if you think that all of that science is bull, you know, well then you shouldn't get to have a serious say on this topic that has because objectively you don't have accurate information to be making a decision.
We should
Yeah.
go through people's Facebook profiles, and if they have information about conspiracies on emissions and stuff like that, then no vote.
Conspiracy theorists are gonna hate you for that. Like, so now you're excluding conspiracy theorists from voting. You're just trying to suppress the truth.
Oh my gosh,
9/11,
conspiracies on me
Like,
now.
yeah. Trying to keep us down, man. The government's coming after us.
I agree with this idea of a test, but I think Kenny points out a really big point that can also be such a huge misuse of power.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Because
Potentially.
who administers the test and who gets a say in the questions? Can
Yeah, I know.
shape.
And are there any biases, like, or any kind of like systemic disadvantages of people actually making those choices?
You should let whoever was not allowed to vote last year on particular issues should get to weigh in on what they think the question should include for next year. Right, so it's the people being excluded deciding what level of education they think is appropriate to have a say on it, right?
I feel like I don't trust that either.
I don't know.
We just can't trust people. That's
Can
my
we move
conclusion.
on to a group that we can trust, or that is too trusting?
Yes, there is a group that's too trusting. The Christian missionaries.
I really like that transition.
One in particular.
One in particular who a few weeks ago decided that he wanted to promote the Christian faith to a tribal community. The tribal communities on the Sentinel Islands near India. And he decided to visit that island 3 times. The first time.
3 times.
Yes. So the first time he went, he got shot with an arrow. So he came back.
Okay.
Did he get injured and have to go to the hospital?
No.
Okay,
No,
just
I
got
don't-
shot at?
So he got
I think
he
he
was
got hit.
injured. He got hit.
Okay.
So
So
but then
did he just like run off the beach back on?
No, he's probably on the
or-
water
yeah.
still. I
So
would think.
so how he got to the island is
Yeah.
basically he hired some fishermen from India to take him close to the island. He got onto a separate boat and canoed.
Oh.
So from the canoe, I think he
Yeah.
probably got shot.
Yeah, so he got shot at.
Okay.
He came back and he decided, first time, bad luck. Let's try it again. So he
God
goes-
needs him
No,
to go
did he
there.
actually say like they're bad luck? Like
Mm.
was he just like, oh, it's just a test from God, or
We don't
Probably
really
a
know.
test.
I don't know, but he was quite persistent that he was going to
Okay.
get onto the island.
Okay.
So the second time he got onto the island, the tribal community destroyed his boat and he swam back to the fisherman boat.
but they didn't injure him.
No, they did not injure him.
They destroyed his vehicle.
Yeah. So it really
Oh,
sounds like
God.
they really do not want him on the island.
Yeah.
So the third time he goes back, and that's when he was killed with arrows and killed by the tribal community.
Wow, that just adds so many more layers. I thought he went once.
No,
He went 3 times.
it was the third time when
Third
he
time's
was
the
actually
charm.
killed.
He
I
has to
mean-
educate those savages Nobody else is. They
You
need
can't
to
call
find
them
God.
savages. They gave him 2 warnings.
Well, let's not call them savages.
No,
I know,
but
that's
didn't
what
he
I'm
call
saying.
them savages? Didn't
I
didn't
call
he
them
call
tribal.
No,
Oh,
but
okay.
didn't the guy, the missionary, call them savages? I don't remember. I briefly
Maybe that's
read
why
the
they
story.
shot him.
They
I'm
said-
using savages
Savages.
in like the term that like would have been used when people were colonizing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's
They sound so reasonable. They gave him 2 warnings. We're like, dude, get off of our
exactly,
island.
and in reality, he knew the history of the island. I mean, the tribal community does not want outsiders, and they are protected by the Indian government.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to intrude onto their land. Number one, I mean, it's their land. They don't want you there. That's fine, and they have legal status to be on the island from the government. But the other big thing as well is, I mean, from a health perspective, these are isolated people. Any disease,
That you-
actually any bacteria that you currently have can potentially kill them.
Yeah.
And they've been really isolated, and
I wonder if they have a knowledge of that, though.
they wouldn't. But this is why the Indian government
government's
has specifically indicated that this is a no-go zone. You
Yeah.
cannot go, because so many examples of colonization have passed where
Right.
you know, North America, like Europeans settling to other regions and just wiping out whole communities.
I think it's so interesting when there's still these communities that are like these like isolated communities that aren't like part of the global world, and I'm so curious what they think of these other people. I always assume that curiosity, so either they're not curious or there's like, no, we're doing our own thing, we don't care what you're doing, and that's fascinating. I think also.
I mean, clearly this group, they do not want anything to do with us. They've seen boats before. They must have. They've seen helicopters before, because there's footage of them shooting arrows at helicopters. But
helicopters would be terrifying.
yeah.
I feel like they wouldn't kill anyone unless they felt truly threatened, because they tried to do those warning shots
Yeah.
How
and it just wasn't listened to.
in the world do you go to a population of people that you don't speak the language of, and you're just like, I'm gonna convert you?
Apparently, just showing the good book. will help.
It happens so much. Mormons do it all the time. There was a musical about it.
Yeah.
It's a good.
There was. Yeah, that's
It's
exactly
a
what
good
it was
musical.
about. It worked out in the musical. Maybe he was influenced by the Book of Mormon, the musical.
But it just it aggravates me, like, because like now he's a martyr according to the Christians, right? And
Oh, really?
Is he actually? That is
there's definitely some
horrific.
There's definitely some postings that have set him up to be a martyr, and
You know
how
what?
he did God's work.
He
Let's
literally-
send all of them, all of those Christian missionaries, let's send them all to that island.
There are too many.
Get all of those natives ready with their arrows.
This is not a very
There's
humanist
some
perspective.
positive, like there's obviously a lot of missionaries where they're just trying to like support and build up communities and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think literally just going there to like spread the word is just like really interesting. I remember being in Thailand and like obviously there everyone is Buddhist. Anyway, they have a lot of temples there, and it was interesting. I was talking to my parents and I was like, yeah, like, you know, like they're not very religious here. And I was like, thought about it. I was like, wait. No. There's temples and shrines absolutely everywhere. But no one tries to talk to you about your religion. No one. They see you as like, you know, you're a traveler, you're a foreigner. Like, we're not going to try and convert you. We're not going to try and share. We'll talk to you about it if you ask. But I just thought it was so interesting. And I think that's so different than Christianity, because Christianity, people are very much like, let me tell you something.
Proselytizing.
You know? And I think they don't realize that they're still doing that. And I think, like,
Well,
that's
it's
more
in the
mentioned.
book that to do that,
Yeah.
right? Where I am assuming that it's not the same for Buddhism.
I don't think so. No. And I feel like that's like a real like annoying piece of religion. Is like, sure, if someone's interested, share that, but it's great when two people can have different religions and they can just, yeah, you know, so mine is yours, okay. If you ask
Two
me
people
about
can't
it,
even
sure.
have different favorite sports teams without getting at each other's throats, you know, like, or even different political views, you know, like imagine if you felt you had the truth of the universe,
Yeah.
you know, and your neighbor was literally going to burn in hell. Like, I mean, I kind of understand why they feel inclined to spread the message, but especially when they also believe that, like, you know, their country is being punished by the devil for its sinful ways, you know, and like it's too big of a there's too much going on to just say, oh, I wish they just keep it to themselves, you know. I mean, we need to, that's
I
unrealistic.
mean, from
to
their
expect.
perspective, they're saving us, right?
Right.
trying to get as many people into heaven as possible, and they're doing.
But God
Good.
loves me no matter what, even if I don't believe in him, right?
What is it my business if somebody else is going to go to hell and I'm going to go to heaven? Like, if that's how they choose to live their life, why am I bothering them about that? I don't know.
Yeah. It's like I'm sure you have friends who smoke and you're like concerned about them, right? Like you see someone making bad life choices and you're like, I care about you. Like, have you tried not smoking? Or have you tried
Have you
eating
tried atheism?
healthier? Right? Like we see people who have like behaviors that we see as long term as like, you know, negative or destructive or, you know, like I feel like we care about people around us. But you know,
I mean,
if you did, you know, if I honestly believe you're gonna be tortured for hell and I cared about you, I'd be like, come on, like let me show you the good book.
I mean,
Fair.
this missionary. I mean, it just from his friends and family, he did sound like a good guy. Was just had all the good intentions in the world,
I'm
but
pretty sure he wrote in his journal the day before, God, please don't let me die, or something like that.
Yeah,
Like, I hope
yeah.
I don't die.
This is sad.
It
I
is
do, I
really
do not
sad.
advocate for death for missionaries. I feel really bad. I mean, poor guy that he died. I just wish there was somebody in his corner who would have said to him, like,
This is
not a good idea.
Well, presumably there were those people. I think he's also not like an average case of your average religious person. I mean, he is an outlier. So I mean, you wouldn't want to focus on him and extrapolate from that experience.
because usually a non-outlier would have gone to the island once and turned back,
Right.
after being shot.
Right.
Do you think this will deter religious groups from going there again?
It just brought enough publicity to it that honestly, it'll probably increase the amount of people doing stuff like that. It's like no publicity is bad publicity kind of thing, you know? I feel like in these circles, it's like...
Anyways, I just this was a story that just annoyed me because of the implications on this tribal community if someone
Yeah.
were to like step on
True.
their land.
Imagine if they all die, you know, they catch some
Yeah.
disease. Like, I'd be really upset, you know?
Anyways, do you think if there was like a Mars colony, they would let people come to Mars, or would they like shoot them
Smooth
with arrows?
transition.
Kenny and I were smooth.
You can fire arrows further on Mars, so...
I don't know if we have enough time for poor Will to.
we can skip this for another time.
I don't know.
don't mind.
Tell us about Mars.
Give us a sampling.
Can you give us
Why
a sample?
Mars?
I can give you something.
Well, let's tie it to like current events.
Yeah.
I mean,
So, basically, similar to my experience in coming to know humanism, I came to become an avid speaker, advocate, Mars colonization in the near future. And the reasoning behind that is I looked at a lot of current issues in the world, and I thought, but like a humanist might, and I thought, what are the current things that could be improved in the world? How could I positively contribute toward, you know, being part of the solution to these problems? And, you know, what is realistically in my power to change and what isn't? And I ended up concluding a somewhat abstract conclusion that if I could advocate for, you know, a future where humanity has begun to colonize Mars, that would be good for Earth, for humanity, you know, for the long-term survival of our species, and for the long-term survival of life in the universe, which I think is, you know, it's important to preserve life in the universe, because it'd be sad to me if Earth went extinct, and you know, who knows if there's life elsewhere, if it's evolved, or you know, we don't know yet. So I would rather preserve and cherish life, and I see setting a colony on Mars up as a first step toward guaranteeing the survival of our species.
How does going to Mars preserve Earth?
So, there's a number of ways. So, for example, if we're talking about how the government should spend money, for example, I mean, talking U.S. now, but with NASA.
Space Force.
Right. So I can't speak to the Space Force. I don't even know if that's a thing or not, but I mean, Trump seems to think it is. But so money spent on different government programs, no matter what program it is, you know, NASA, you know, whatever, you know, some healthcare program, repairing roads, you know, it all has a real world return for that country's economy. It can be quantified. So some programs are more or less benefit, like have more or less of a real world return for that country than others. So in the case of NASA, the return on government investment in space has been estimated to be between 7 to 14%. So that means every time that you spend $100 on space, the economy benefits $114 or $107. So it's actually like if you had money sitting around and you wanted to increase the benefit that you're getting from that money, spending it in space would actually produce more money in the economy, where people I think see that as just like a cost, like you're throwing money into a void and then it's gone, and that money could have been used elsewhere. But ultimately it's by stimulating the economy and producing more economic growth and economic benefit, we'll actually have more resources to spend on the other things as well. So that's kind of one key thing, is you have to think about government spending on programs as investments in themselves. And in the case of money spent in space, it is increasing the amount of resources that those countries then have to spend on other things. So here's how that's flushed out. So the returns generated in a number of ways, including through the development of new technologies. And those specific to Mars colonization would be water purification technology, learning to have larger farm yields using less space through hydroponics and GMO research, air purification techniques, and gathering data on how Mars lost its atmosphere to better understand global warming on our own planet.
And there's just going to be so many countless things we just would not be able to even dream of right now. Because, so for example,
the Apollo missions, right?
Yeah, almost 100 years ago, like people were looking at or figured out the concept of like MRIs, like magnetic resonance. Mm-hmm. No one had no idea what to even do with this until like maybe in I think 60s or 70s, someone figured out, wait, we can use this to kind of figure out the vibrations of atoms. Couldn't we just point it at a body and like no one did the link between this physics research and medical research until decades later.
So you can look at the Apollo missions to go to the moon and you can say, well, look how many billions we spent on that. And if we'd taken those billions and fed children or put it toward whatever cause it is that you personally think we should have spent that money on, well, then we would have missed out on countless benefits that are currently benefiting our economy. And ultimately, we would end up doing less for these other causes because we would have lost that economic and scientific advancement.
Can you tell us what's happened this year with Mars?
So Mars has kind of been the goal since the Apollo missions, but lately, but then what happened is, a number of things happened. I won't get into the long story now, but pretty much advancement in space fell off and we stopped going past low Earth orbit. And recently there's been a resurgence, mainly by private companies and kind of like individuals in society, not so much governments.
Elon Musk, I heard he's going
Elon
to
Musk,
Mars. Jeff
Bezos, the Amazon founder, richest man in the world, there's Bigelow, Richard Branson.
Yeah, Richard Branson.
So there's a number of independent billionaires currently who have founded a number of companies, such as Elon Musk's SpaceX, Blue Origins with Jeff Bezos, and a lot of those are focused on not specifically Mars. SpaceX is focused on specifically Mars, but they're all focused on rocket technology and lowering the costs of putting things into space, because that's always been the biggest barrier in the way of doing anything in space. Is if it's going to cost you, $100 million to put a couple pounds up in orbit. Well, you're not going to do a lot up in orbit, but if you can bring that cost down by 1,000 times, which is what SpaceX has currently been doing by introducing reusable rocket technology. The analogy that's often cited is if you imagine the cost of using an airliner to fly to a different continent, how much a ticket would cost if every time the way that the plane worked is you would build the plane, board it, it would fly, and then just as you're going into the other continent, and just as you're over the continent, you jump out in a parachute and the plane just crashes. Well, the tickets to board that flight would have to be enough to cover the entire cost of building, a 147 or whatever the plane's are, 747 aircraft. So it just would not be economical to do that. Where the reason why we can use planes and it makes sense economically is because we land them, refuel them, and then fly them back and use them multiple times without having to refurbish them too much. It's really just the cost of fuel and the airline attendants. So a similar transition, a paradigm shift has just happened with rocket technology in recent years, where SpaceX has successfully designed a rocket that for the first time will go up, land back down on Earth, more or less intact, and then with only a little bit of refurbishment currently, which they're working towards zero refurbishment and reflight times within the same day, you just refuel it and send it off again. And that's already brought the cost of putting stuff in space down astronomically.
Good pun, Will.
Yeah, but really, like it's a paradigm shift in the industry, and so everything space is going to be blowing up in the near future, just because of cost savings, and new vehicles are being developed and proposed, and funded at an astounding rate. That's really revolutionizing this space. So that all is only peripherally related to Mars colonization, but cost being the biggest downside or the biggest impediment to Mars colonization, we really are on the cusp of an entirely new space race, which not only will be really exciting in my view, but will have ridiculous, real returns for this investment. And a good thing is that even if you don't necessarily agree that this investment will yield benefit results for Earth, it's not really the governments who are even doing it anymore. It's these private companies. So, I mean, would you rather Jeff Bezos buy $1 billion mansion or invest in bringing down the cost of rocket technology, right? So these are billionaires using their own funds and private companies getting investment from other private companies without reliance very much on the taxpayer. So yeah, it's going that way whether or not the government's on board or not. And yeah.
It's funny that it took so long. It took private investors in order to get technology that's reusable.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because, the current big guns in the industry, like, the Russian manufacturers.
Dude, they're still using the same spacecrafts. Like, they haven't actually updated their Soyuz very much.
Since the 80s.
Yeah,
70s.
it's literally. So, and
same.
because it's all economics, right?
But it's also how it was structured. Back in the 80s, 90s, rocket development was funded by the government to these contractors. I mean, the cost to build these basically the incentives weren't in place, right? Because the contractors, they just want more and more money. So that if they have delays, you can't get this rocket.
More profits, right? Yeah. So now there's finally competition, and that's the key. So the competition has been introduced to the industry, and that's driving innovation. I mean, it's the same with what Elon Musk did with electric cars. Right?
And we should keep in mind, I mean, really this came from the government, because it was the U.S. government that set up the right programs to actually start commercial development.
Okay, so yeah, that's true. Partnership with SpaceX partnership.
But
with
they knew
with NASA.
this was the case, because I mean they totally understood the concept of needing to commercialize in order to reduce costs, because if they just solely relied on a single contractor, you're just going to get screwed.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll move on to some other benefits I see from a Mars colony for Earth, other than just the investment side. Is I feel that a Martian colony would ease political tensions on Earth and could increase cooperation between governments, and reduce, the potential for war and whatnot. So
yeah, a great example of that already is the International Space Station.
Exactly.
Which has so many different groups working together.
Yeah. So basically, what I have here is it's been shown through projects like the International Space Station, the Large Hadron Collider, ITER, which is
It's a fusion.
Right. That when governments cooperate on large projects, it acts as an incentive for them to work peacefully together in other areas as well. It's a deterrent to war and other forms of conflict between nations. Because like Russia and the U.S. both having such an investment and a stake in the International Space Station, they have to work cooperatively there, right? So if and the more projects that are internationally connected, the more de-incentivized these governments are to just deteriorate relations with each other. So that's always been and I think a Martian colony would be a massive international collaborative effort, and that would be good for government cooperation. But also, I think that psychologically, like it could motivate individuals to see the perspective that we're all in this together on a tiny rock floating through space. You know, kind of the perspective, if you've ever seen Pale Blue Dot, Carl Sagan's speech on this. You know, it gives us perspective. You know, the right now it's an us versus them mentality between our neighboring countries, right? But you know, it could create. But I don't think anyone really thinks of the world or Earth as an us. But once there's an Earth and a Mars, you know, maybe it'll make some strides. I mean, it's a reach, but I'm hoping that in the long term, it can increase our perspective.
It's also just really inspiring, just because it'll take so many different groups of people and so many nations that it will feel like something that was accomplished on kind of a global scale. And I feel like it's so cool also for like children and like encouraging
I think it'll spur
STEM
quite a lot of
education.
innovation, because there's what does education look like on Mars, and what governments would look like. I mean, it would spur some different.
What does the
concepts.
first pizza place look like on Mars?
Exactly.
Is there pizza on Mars? What does that pizza look like?
Well, anyone can create the first pizza joint on Mars. You know, once there's people living up there. Now, I think the last obvious benefit from something like this would be inspiring the next generation of physicists and and STEM. Like kids growing up knowing that if they work hard in school and if they study, they could lead a new frontier. You know, they could go have an important role in spreading humanity across the cosmos. You know, like that's a really interesting, exciting career option, and there would be so many like high knowledge STEM type jobs that would be in high demand, and I think it'd be great for motivating our next generation to work hard in school and pick that career path.
And
like
also,
that.
again, this idea of collaboration, right? Because it's not the idea that you're going to be that lone astronaut or that lone engineer trying to work on some kind of problem. No, you're going to be part of a bigger picture. And I think that's really cool. Like being part of this like global project, which is just being done for the very first time, is so cool.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Yeah. So, do you have any other questions?
Well, recently I saw an article, I kind of breezed past it, but there was an article that the space rocket going to Mars crash landed, did it? Or I can't remember. Did we land on Mars? Did we land there?
We land the InSight probe
We did.
on Mars, and that probe is meant to basically measure seismic.
Yeah, seismic. Sure. It
measures the vibrations in the ground.
and it's trying to figure out, what
Seismic?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what's a word.
I like seismatic though. That's a cool word. It's just measuring, different stuff within the Martian interior to try and get an idea of the composition of the interior of the planet. It's doing a lot of other things too. So that's pushing the frontier of science and learning. But really, I think that once we get astronauts' boots on the ground there, they'll be able to do work in science and research that
different pace.
So even just from a financial perspective, I mean, how many robots you'd have to send and how much it costs to send these robots. Yeah. All of their tasks could be accomplished by one human put there for a year on an outpost or 2 years or whatnot. And so, I mean, if you take the billions we're already investing in sending these probes and just shift that to sending a human, I don't really see too much cost inefficiency.
Yeah. I mean, for me, why I think this is important, it's kind of from a longer timeline. If you kind of let's envision the timeline extending out to thousands of years.
Yeah.
There's no way current life on Earth could extend beyond Earth without us taking some first steps. And this is kind of the first step. And we know that Earth only has a finite time scale. Right. I know it's still in the millions of years, but
humanity only has a finite time scale that's much less than Earth's time scale, I think.
Yeah, but really, when you kind of look from a much longer timeline, there's no way either our descendants would be able to reach beyond Earth unless we start now, essentially.
Can I flesh out that argument? Do we have time? It'll take a second.
2 minutes.
Okay, I can't do it in 2 minutes, so I'll skip that whole thing. That is the main reason why why I think it's important that humanity makes this step is the preservation of life in the universe. I won't get into how I feel this contributes to that.
Will has a 10,000 word essay in front of him.
He's got a passion for Mars. I think we should have an episode on Mars at some point.
We can. I'll as quickly in 2 minutes, I can cover two common misconceptions about the whole Mars thing. So one is the idea that so some people have the view that people are awful and everything we touch we ruin, as if humanity is some kind of disease or right, like the whole Matrix. You're a virus, right? Therefore, we should leave the universe alone. And that may be true on Earth, that we do more harm than good to nature, because our environments are so perfectly balanced by evolutionary processes that any way that we decide to change or influence them just throws off this perfect balance, and that causes negative effects on the ecosystems. But this isn't true of other worlds, because they're already dead and barren, and anything we do to these other worlds can only add to or improve them.
The only compelling argument I've heard along those lines is this idea that maybe there is life on Mars, and by us physically going there, we're going to ruin our chances of actually being able to conclusively say, look, we found life on Mars.
Yes.
When we're there, we won't know if we brought it there or if it's there. That's the only compelling argument.
No, that's a fair point. And we do have to be careful not to contaminate the planet, just for the sake of our own science and understanding.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say from a moral perspective,
No.
I don't think it really matters if Martian biology ends up coexisting with human biology and like whatever. But I do think from a scientific standpoint, it's important that we make sure we don't ruin any chances to have to analyze Mars before we contaminate it, I guess you could say. But more so is just like the ethical implications of not spreading life, as if life is some inherent, or humanity is some inherently negative thing.
Yeah.
I think that life is the most beautiful thing in the universe, and we are uniquely situated right now with our capabilities to be able to spread life, not just human life, but even to seed the beginnings of bacterial life in other worlds, that even if we do go extinct long after us, there will be new evolutionary chains on new worlds, and soon we'll have, and we could be the catalyst of populating our dead barren galaxy with new exciting evolutionary chains of biological life. And I imagine a universe or a future, like Kenny was saying, where that happens and where the universe is teeming with life.
But what if someone catalyzed Earth?
Well, then it's a good thing that we have other worlds, because So that's that one. I don't really agree with the sentiment that humans are inherently a negative thing and that if we go extinct, that's a positive thing. Because additionally, I think that for all our flaws and all of our weaknesses currently, we're not quite as rational or we're not quite as kind as we could be. I think that we're currently in our infancy as a species, and what we could become on an evolutionary timescale. Or I mean, if we've been around for a couple 100,000 meaningful years of humanity, well, we're talking millions and billions of years in the future. What we could become as a species could be so different, and so much, it will by necessity be so much better than we currently are. The better elements of our nature will necessarily have to win and come through, or else we will go extinct. So, I mean, in future timescales, we'll have a number of planets out there, and the ones that go extinct are going to be the ones that let our greed and our anger and our viciousness succeed. But those worlds that go extinct will then be colonized by the worlds that succeeded, and our kindness and love for each other and whatnot succeeded, and ultimately will evolve into a much better humanity. So, whatever we think are the negatives of our species now doesn't really matter, because we're just in our infancy, and if we can just get out to the stars, we can achieve our true potential and hopefully spread life to the universe.
I think you're too optimistic, because going back to my argument on I don't trust people, I also don't trust people traveling into space and using love.
No, I think it's more the idea that corruption will just destroy, implode in and of itself.
Yeah, it's more the idea that
it might go spread, but eventually won't make it.
As far as survival goes, I think that the negative elements of our nature are counterproductive to our species survival. So when you have a number of different test cases, so a number of different planets that all have their own societies, their own governments, new ways of forming human society, that we might not have experienced on Earth. The ones that are prone to utilize those negative elements of our nature, I think that they will inevitably go extinct. I think not necessarily, but I think that most of our negative, our inability to think into the future, our selfishness, all of those, our inability to work together. I think all of those things will result in those worlds going extinct, and in the long run, evolutionary processes will lead us slowly but surely toward our better nature.
That's not what I saw in Star Trek. So.
Anyway, we can have a whole nother discussion. Yeah, we have a whole nother discussion on that.
Let's have another podcast on Mars, and we'll go through point by point on Mars. But thank you, everyone, for joining us on our year-end review podcast, and we'll see you guys in 2019.
Yay! Happy
Peace.
New Year, guys!
Bye.